I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to have.
Well, my story is still being written, hopefully for another couple of decades.
When we speak about wealth, we tend to speak about economic wealth, tend to speak about money.
Yeah.
And this is the way that I believe the Western world has really conditioned us to think.
Yeah. If you're thinking as an African, there's such a thing as a soul, and that your soul is related to other souls who've been there lifetimes after lifetimes.
Now you're talking about revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Acosphere second podcast. We have an amazing guest today. I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to have. Gaynde, you will introduce yourself in a minute. This is going to be on our YouTube channel from time to time, as we announced it earlier in the year, and we are delighted that you are following this online today. So Gaynde, welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you so very much. I'm really, really glad to be here. Glad to have this extensive conversation with you today.
Let's get started then. I want to start not in an interview format, but really understand who you are from your perspective, your story, in other words, or your journey, whichever angle you want to take.
Well, my story is still being written, hopefully for another couple of decades. But I can at least tell you how the whole thing started and what I'm doing here today. Interestingly enough, I was born here because my father was like, my father is Senegalese, my mother is from neighboring country, Guinea. And he said, I gotta have at least one of my kids born in Senegal. So it was purely out of nationalistic views that he decided that I was born here. So I was born here, grew up in Abidjan till age 14. And then my family, we moved to Canada, Montreal. I spent about 13, 14 years there, which is funny because while we were in Canada, he was in the US, so we would sort of visit him in Maryland. And then after Canada, I moved to New York. And after New York, I moved to Senegal 11, 12 years ago. While I was up and coming, I did quite a bit of traveling around the world, spent some time in Latin America. At the time, mostly in Venezuela. At the time, I was really involved in quote unquote radical politics, revolution.
Radical politics?
Yeah, revolution.
What do you mean?
I mean, I was a political science student.
Okay.
But it was just more than studying political science. I wanted to have that understanding of how do we change the world? These questions that you ask yourself when you are like in your early 20s.
Fundamental and existential questions, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so at the time, the country where revolution actually was taking place was Venezuela. At the time, the leader of Venezuela, his name was Comandante Chavez. At the time, my Spanish was fluent enough, so I just humped on the flight and then went to Caracas and spent a couple of months, actually 2 months, not that much, but not that many months, but enough to be fully in the energy of the moment, right? Prior to actually going to Venezuela, I was in another country very dear to my heart. I was in Jamaica.
Really?
The home of Marcus Garvey, the father of Pan-Africanism.
Now you're talking about revolution.
Yeah, exactly. And
Chavez?
yeah, exactly. So I had spent about 2 months in Jamaica, and then from there went on and spent 2 months in Venezuela. So when I returned to Montreal after that, I mean, obviously I wasn't the same person.
How old were you back then?
Oh, I was 20, 24, 20, 26, something like that. Yeah. Which is not that long ago. I'm turning 42 very soon. So, so after that, prior to that, the year before, I was in Bangladesh.
Okay.
Spent 4 months in Bangladesh. Why? Well, for social investigation, I wanted to understand. I had been told, and from my readings, that Bangladesh was the quote unquote poorest country in the world by economic standards.
Right.
So I wanted to go there, engage with people, understand that reality, and see whether I can benchmark some of the key lessons on some of the key lessons that I would learn there, in order to really develop my own thinking as far as how to change things in Africa.
It's amazing because and I take it that this is the angle that you were speaking about. When we speak about wealth, we tend to speak about economic wealth, tend to speak about money.
Yeah.
And this is the way that I believe the Western world has really conditioned us to think.
Yeah.
But actually, funnily enough, in those places where people have the least money, you find the biggest smiles, the biggest hearts,
Absolutely.
and you find really a life in people that is totally different. How was it with the Bangladeshi?
Well, see, it's interesting because that's exactly what I got to understand when, after 4 months in this so-called poorest country in the world. Because Bangladesh is not India.
Yeah.
Bangladesh is not Pakistan. As a matter of fact, Bangladesh, they fought for their independence. They were part of Pakistan. It was actually called East Pakistan. So you have Pakistan, then you have India, and then you have East Pakistan. And in 1970, they engaged in the war they called it the Liberation War. And with the support of India. At the time, Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister of India. And so the rivalry between India and Pakistan, India therefore supported Bangladesh.
Right.
And they earned their independence in 1971. So when I was there, actually, in 2008, you still had people who were freedom fighters. They called them freedom fighters because 1971 they were young and Bangladesh had no army.
Yeah.
So it was literally peasants, farmers, laymen, who basically made up the army and then fought and earned their independence. So what I found there is, obviously on the financial or monetary level, of course it was a so-called poor country, but given the recent history of the country and the fact that the general population was involved in the struggle for independence and had earned their independence, their sense of being wealthy is totally different than what one could expect coming from a Western country.
Yeah.
Namely, I was coming from Canada. And it's funny because my interaction with people was a very paradoxical bias, because I didn't know whether I should introduce myself as an African or a Canadian. And even African, I mean, I'm here, so I could say, yes, I'm from Senegal and Guinea, but when you are in the Western country, they don't necessarily dissociate this country from another country. So you are an African, but then it has to do with the historical trajectory. There's African American. In Canada, it's slightly different. So over there, people didn't know whether they should see me as a Westerner, in which case I'm black, so I'm not exactly the kind of Westerner they're used to in their frame of reference, or whether I should call myself an African. And then they were like, yeah, but then we don't really have Africans around here, right? So they would say things like, oh, we know Mandela. I'm like, okay, yeah, okay, sure, all right, yeah. Do you know Mandela? I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, Mandela, okay. But that's as far as that would go. So my interaction was very interesting in that sense. But to go back to your question of defining what is wealth, if we were to equate wealth with social value creation, the history of Bangladesh would enable one to define wealth differently than the usual standard.
How is that?
Because it's a very rich culture.
Yeah.
And it's a poor country.
Yeah.
So what they have is they really hold on to their culture. Desh in Bengali, that's the thing. There's Bengali, but in India you also have Bengal, right?
Yeah.
So Desh means the country.
Yeah.
And Bangla is, you pronounce Bangla or you'd say Bengali. You have, in Bangladesh, you have other ethnic communities. You don't only have Bengali communities, right? It's the predominant one, but you have other cultures and other identities. So you're Bangladeshi, but it doesn't mean you're Bengali, right? The literature, the Nobel Prize, 1913, I think, Rabindranath Tagore was from Bengal, but he's one of the founding fathers of modern Bangladeshi culture. I was I was madly enthusiastic about, this Bangladeshi author. His name is Kazi Nazrul Islam. He was called the rebel poet, Bidrohi Kobi. That's how they say it in the language. And he was definitely a rebel, and he was from the 1930s and 1940s. He's one of the precursors of modern Bangladeshi culture. These are the kind of things that you don't really hear about when you live in a Western country, let alone living in Africa.
Of course.
Right? And it's so just to give you just an example of how rebellious Qazi Nazrul Islam was. He married a Hindu. His wife was Hindu, so obviously it was great. That was quite a challenge, because over there you were either Muslim or you were Hindu, right? And they're very community oriented, and they feel very strongly about being either one, or either Hindu or Muslim. He married a Hindu woman, and he named his son Muhammad Krishna. So that's a statement. That's a statement.
A big statement, and actually it is also a marriage of love.
Yes.
Particularly in an environment where the two cultures coexist, but you don't mix those two cultures.
No, exactly. You could be from the same country. Doesn't mean you guys get along well. I mean, we've seen it in Burma, right? Which in Burma you had, how do you understand this, that a Buddhist monk, how do you put in the same sentence, nationalist Buddhist monk,
Interesting.
Yeah, fighting against what they call the invaders.
Wow.
In Burma. I mean, if you remember, what were they called? What were they called in Burma?
The Burmese?
In Burma, you had like thousands of people were expelled from Burma. They were called I forgot the name. Yeah, you know what I'm referring to.
I know.
Right? That was a few years ago.
Yes. It was
Burma.
quite a.
Yeah,
it was a bit like the immigrants right now in Europe.
Yes.
That are
Same
parked
thing.
somewhere.
Yeah. They were called I forgot the name. Well, it's probably going to come back, but
yeah.
So you had the Buddhist monks who had very fiery rhetoric against this. How can I forget the name of that community? Anyway, it's going to come later. So sometimes you could live in a country, you could share the country's identity. It doesn't mean that you guys get along well, which is rather unfortunate, especially in this day and age, right? Yeah. So
that's a very interesting subject that I'd like to dig deep into.
The Rohingya people.
Yeah.
The Rohingya people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the Rohingyas,
They
were called foreigners.
Yeah,
right?
they had a tough. From what I could read from the news actually. I didn't have any other way of really assessing the real situation. They had a really tough time.
Absolutely. Thousands of
But that leads to a very interesting subject. I like to dig deep into it. Wherever you go in humanity, there's something called fear, and that's discounted a lot in the education. We talk about it, but as if it was just a matter of course, but it influences so much the way people think, the way people do things, the way people behave. And because of fear, you are Senegalo-Guinean, and therefore, I am fearful of you because you're different.
Right.
And actually, that difference is, and this is something that I think you probably embrace because you told me about how much you've been traveling. That difference is what we should embrace in the humanity, because that gets us to knowledge.
Absolutely.
And we tend to, it's funny, we have so much technology at hand right now. And people don't read, the new generations don't read, so their brain works differently. Granted, the games help in the way they think, they help probably with process, but their thinking and the acquisition of knowledge is done in a very different manner than when you were growing up. And the knowledge of the person who is different from you is something that people need to really embrace for the world to go forward. But the current trends seem to go the opposite way, nationalistic. I'm not going to talk about politics.
No,
but
overall,
what are your thoughts around this? The lack of the big fear that people have, the lack of embracing the foreigners when somebody comes to your country, and also the impact it has on knowledge, on acquisition of knowledge.
I think perceptions. These are okay. Fear is a natural instinct, but at that level, fear are social construct that are nurtured by different levels of different educational frameworks.
Yeah.
Whether at home, school, because if you have, let's say school, right? Because I'm an educator.
Yeah.
Let's say school, for instance. I mean, I teach at higher ed, but still,
What do you teach?
Well, I don't like to say I teach philosophy because you don't teach philosophy, but I encourage students to think philosophically.
Very good.
Right?
Very good.
That's what
you
I
encourage
do.
students to think philosophically.
Yeah.
I like this.
That's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, actually.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So people say, I teach philosophy, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I motivate them to develop their own philosophical thinking.
Yeah.
Even challenge my own, right? So regarding the question you asked, I think there's a deeper question underneath. It has to do with the story you tell yourself.
Yeah.
And how do you define otherness? How do you define otherness? And many factors could determine your definition of otherness. I'll give an example. I love movies. So when you look at, now in Senegal, you see there's a growing Indian community here, Indian expats.
Yeah.
You do see them. It's been for the last maybe 5-6 years, not even 10 years, right? So if you grew up watching Bollywood movies, when you see someone from India living in Senegal, you're not that lost. He or she represents that otherness, but it's somewhat familiar otherness, right? You see, there's a Turkish community here in Senegal, right? But if, let's say you're German, growing up in Germany, you're a whole lot more familiar with someone of Turkish descent than growing up in Senegal.
Of course.
But part of the Turkish global presence is in movies and television shows, so-called novellas. And we see more and more of the Turkish television content, of course in French, but it's Turkish.
Yeah.
So people are more and more used to Turkish names. You know, here people would say Muhammad. In Turkey, they would say Mehmet. You know, people are more and more used to that. So when they meet people of Turkish descent here in Dakar, because they work in constructions, for instance, it's still the otherness, but I would say we, generally speaking, are more used to it, right? To that other. But then imagine someone from, I remember I met this couple, they've been living in Senegal since 1980. Mr. and Mrs. Ibrahim, they're from Kazakhstan. Imagine going around and then telling people, Kazakhstan, you know, could you tell me where Kazakhstan is on the map? They can't locate.
Yeah.
Or let's talk about the Caribbean, for instance. If you say Jamaica or Cuba or Martinique, people are like, yeah, although they've never been there, they're like, yeah, okay, I'm familiar. But just try St. Vincent, see how people react. Or Grenada, you know, or St. Croix. People go, what are you talking about?
Yeah, they don't, most people don't know.
Yeah. So it really has to do with the fear, that's one thing, but how one defines otherness has to do with the story you tell yourself and the story you tell, and the story, and how much access you have to the stories of the other. Indian movies, Turkish telenovelas, and Japan in the 1970s, where the Japanese government invested a lot of money in dojos and martial arts right, across the world. So everybody knows or is somewhat familiar with karate and judo.
And judo,
right? There's this and what else? Well, I'm not talking about just the cars and the electronics. I'm talking about Japanese culture.
Yes,
first of all.
indeed.
So
But I want to pick on these points
Sure,
also,
sure.
because it's a very telling thing. I like your otherness,
yes, sir.
because it's a very telling thing, and it's linked to knowledge also.
I am the other when I'm here.
Yeah,
By the way, I'm the other.
yeah,
when
because
I'm here.
because you're not from Gorée.
Well, no,
because
not
you're not-
Gole, because I speak Wolof with a strange accent.
All right, yes, and it's
Because-
very interesting that you'd say that.
Yeah, I'm the other.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm the other you have to deal with because I'm from here.
Yeah.
So I'm not the other like a tourist would be the other. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just
No,
felt like
that's quite
saying,
all right. That's quite all right.
you know, like even when I come to Gorée, because we're on Gorée, like, you know, you have a certain fare that you pay when you're Senegalese, another when you're from ECOWAS region, another one when you. So I always get asked the question, or people speak to me in English.
Yeah.
It's funny, and then I would answer in Wolof, you know,
Yeah.
or that's funny, or you know, I have more of the Fulani features of my mom's side. So when people see me, they're like, "Is he really Fulani?" Because Fulanis are rather conservative.
Yeah.
And then they see I got my tattoos. I have my own swag, which is rather different than what's to expect from someone of Fulani culture.
Yeah.
So I'm the permanent other when I'm here, and I'm totally cool and comfortable with that.
It's
Sorry,
I feel
yeah.
exactly the same as
Yeah,
you, which
okay.
is interesting because
Okay.
so my mother is a Mendi and my grandmother is Gomis, and they are from Gorée. So our children are the fourth generation
Right.
Goreans.
Yeah.
Having said that, my family name is Akoni.
Which-
So as soon as I say this in Senegal, people say, "Oh, so you're from Benin?" I say, "No, I'm Senegalese." And actually, I am technically more from Benin because
Yeah.
citizenship is given by the father.
Yeah.
But I always have felt Senegalese.
Right.
A funny story about that. I told my wife, no, I'm not Beninese, I'm Senegalese because she's from Benin. And she said to me, "Okay, so that's how you view it. I can respect that."
Yeah.
And so our children should have the Senegalese citizenship. Of
course.
No problem with that.
Of course.
And so we get the children, the first child gets born, second child gets born, she goes ahead and gets them Beninese passports. And I say, she said, and she says to me, "But didn't you say that the nationality comes from the mother?" So I got caught into my own game. I got caught into my own game.
Yeah.
But this otherness here, and it's not just in Senegal.
No.
But it is an interesting one that you say so because you have, your father's name is a Senegalese
Typical.
recognized name.
Yeah.
But actually, people don't really consider that you're fully Senegalese.
Yes,
that you have
yes.
two nationalities.
But and see, and that's the thing is, I made my peace with it because there are different ways of being Senegalese. Well, first off, here's how I would introduce myself. I'm an African from Senegal and Guinea.
That's a beautiful way.
I'm an African from Senegal and Guinea. Just like you have African Americans, you have Afro-Ecuatoriano, Afro-Peruano. I'm an African from Senegal and Guinea.
Absolutely. You're African first. Yeah.
Exactly,
absolutely. Yeah.
right? I relate to a billion, 1.3 billion people rather than
Yeah,
18 million.
Yeah.
And I don't remember like the demographics of Guinea. The reason why I bring this up is there are different ways of being Senegalese. You could be, there are actually different ways of being African, but I would label 3 different ways of being African. The typology is rather simplistic, but let me go ahead. You could be, first of all, Kwame Nkrumah said, "You're not African because you're born in Africa, you're African because Africa was born in you."
Yeah.
Right? So there are 3 ways of being African. Born in Africa, spent your life in Africa, second way. So you do identify with Africa. And that doesn't mean black, you could be Turkish, whatever it
As
is.
a matter of fact, the new IOC
Yes.
head is from Zimbabwe,
exactly.
but she's white.
That's
I
it.
think she's
You see
white.
what I'm saying? Yeah.
I saw her from distance, yeah.
So, and the third way is when Africa is in your heart.
Yeah.
When Africa is in your heart, you're just as entitled to being African than the one who was born on the continent.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not about, it's more. I wouldn't say it's not about the color. I would say it's more than that.
Yeah.
So my sense of identity as a global citizen, is I'm an African from Senegal and Guinea.
Yeah.
I know my dad used to be upset when I would say Senegal and Guinea. Like, oh, you Senegalese. I'm like, you were born in Guinea. What are you talking about? You know. So that's as a global citizen.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an African from Senegal and Guinea.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting this territory.
Yeah.
In French, you say territorialism.
Yeah.
So this need that we have as human beings to first to label
Territorialize your identity.
things. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also to label things. So I didn't introduce you as, you know, anything because
Yeah.
I know you're way more than just what you teach.
Yeah,
You're way
yeah,
more
yeah.
than your titles, and we're going to continue to dig into this. Knowledge management is what I grew up with in the corporate world. Back in the days when I was working for Xerox, and there was a lot of platforms that are now softwares and sometimes just applications that helped you manage knowledge.
Right.
And it was important because you could bring to your customer the experience of understanding fundamentally from their documents, understanding how they worked, how they thought, and where the gaps were, and how you could actually help them with new tools to be more productive. Because at the time we were talking about productivity. How do you? What are your views on knowledge and knowledge management in general?
Well, I'll go with the basics, which is that you have fundamental knowledge, you know, physics, mathematics, understanding the laws of nature, human nature. So there's fundamental knowledge and there's applied knowledge. So what you're referring to is applied knowledge. And when it comes to applied knowledge, I mean, one doesn't necessarily exclude the other, but there's just different modalities of knowledge processing. And what is the outcome of processing that knowledge? Fundamental knowledge is, you know, having a certain granularity about the nature of reality, for instance. So what are the laws of physics, right? And having a broader understanding of what is, what could be, what once was, and so on and so forth. Whereas applied knowledge has to do with utility and optimizing utility. And now it's a very interesting time. We're living in very interesting times now because applied knowledge is also part of the human realm of activities since prehistoric times. From the dawns of times, technology has been part of what makes us who we are as human beings. I mean, we've developed cultures based on the development of agricultural tools. We've developed civilizations because we're able to develop weapons. We're talking about the different levels of industrializations and the difference between, you know, people used to say, actually we're saying Western countries, global South and whatnot, but the technical terms would be industrialized countries and less industrialized countries. I mean, the real difference between the one group versus the other is in terms of level of industrialization. So my take on this specific matter is that there are different kinds of knowledge, and we need to create a system where these different levels and different kinds of knowledge can be interconnected, so that we can live better lives. And I mean, I know it sounds cheesy to put it that way, but literally. And we are in a time where cognitive processes can be outsourced artificially. So just 15 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you would have to process knowledge and then externalize some of these processes with the tools that you had handy. Now, you can externalize your own cognitive processes to other artificial brains. So you become like a coach with a team of brains, and you can get those brains to assist you in drawing the roadmap, the strategy, optimizing the strategy, giving you feedback, and getting better at what you're doing. So now the nature of knowledge and applied knowledge is definitely different. And technology evolves exponentially, right? So more technologies, computational power on an exponential scale, which makes it that what would have taken 10 years to accomplish, now it can happen within 6 months. And because it's an exponential curve, what would take 6 months now might take 2 months next year. And this is where the gap needs to be fixed. It's that we still think, unfortunately for a majority of the just common laymen in Africa and other parts of the world, of the global south, we still look at reality from an analog framework. When the world and applied knowledge, first is digitized, and second, it is very highly digitized. I mean, they're heading towards quantum computing when we're still thinking analog. So I hope my answer is not too, it's not really an answer as a matter of fact, it's just
a reflection.
Yes, this is, and I'm trying to figure out how to make sense out of it.
I think fundamental knowledge, as you were describing it, is something that my perception is that it is getting reduced for all of us.
Okay.
I'm maybe old-fashioned in saying that through books, the amount of accumulated knowledge that we used to have is something that you can't replace with applied knowledge tools. It's something that you can't replace with just giving some prompts to a tool,
to generative AI,
to get
to a large language model. This is called the large language model.
And also, what it does is it makes your brain, and therefore the way you think, your cognitive approach, just more lazy.
Is that what you think?
That's my impression. Hang on, let me just finish. Okay. So, and I know where you're taking me. I think I know where you're taking me. But my point is, there is a handful or two handfuls of people who are actually using the whole thing positively, and therefore actively training their brain. So they're using fundamental knowledge to do better with applied knowledge. They're using applied knowledge to question some of the fundamental knowledge that they know, etc. But that's not the majority of human beings, I think.
Depending on what part of the world, but it is true. That's interesting because I'm listening to you, and I'm listening to how you structure how you comment your own structure, how you comment your approach to knowledge, and that's very interesting because you have not defined how you approach knowledge, but you've not defined how you approach knowledge. You've just defined how you position your approach to knowledge compared to this timeline.
Indeed.
Yeah. And that's very interesting because I think this is where some work needs to be done on all parts.
Yeah.
Applied knowledge in today's fashion, with the tools that we have, can enable one to probe deeper into fundamental knowledge.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That's what computational power allows you to do.
Yeah.
Think of it this way, because you gave an example. You have more human knowledge that was produced within a year, between the year, I think, 2010 and 2011, compared to the first 3 million years prior.
Why was that?
Why?
Yeah.
Because what is computational power?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right? It's because now we have all that information, but we can make correlations between these different data points. And therefore, the models that we use can enable us to produce new levels of knowledge, right? So we have layers and layers and layers and layers of knowledge. Someone who was a student in the 1970s, for instance, would have had to go to a different town, a different country, to go to a different library or a different bookstore to have access to one specific knowledge, and then he would have to travel back. Today, it's more than just having access to that knowledge using your mobile phone or laptop, is that you could be critical and you could generate new knowledge yourself. So we're in a totally different paradigm now.
Yeah.
But it's very new. I mean, even the ones with the forerunners of AI now are saying this thing is going berserk and we have no control over it. So I think the issue is not so much about applied knowledge and not even about artificial intelligence, but it's about another aspect of human nature, which is wisdom.
Yeah.
We should not be afraid of artificial intelligence, we should be afraid of the lack of wisdom. Do we have enough sense of wisdom to limit ourselves? Do we have enough sense of balance, which comes from that wisdom, so that we don't go overboard? I'm very cynical when it comes to that, because when you look at the industrial era for the last 250 years, human culture as a whole has been rather destructive.
Completely.
And totally imbalanced.
If
right?
I can take an example, I mean, we still live with beliefs that are fundamentally taking their root in the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
For instance, we believe that we need to eat 3 times a day.
Yes.
Some people even think they need to eat 5 times a day.
Yes.
And then you really question knowledge, because you will question also those who tell you you need to eat for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And then fast for 16 hours a day.
Exactly.
So the fast that is currently happening for our Muslim brothers and for the Christians, which is different, by the way, and in some countries the Christians are actually imitating or competing with the Muslims for reasons that are for them to understand. I do a different fast, but I do often a 15, 16 hour fast.
Intermittent fasting, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And actually, when I do that, and when I also diminish the amount of meat that I take, I sleep better. Systematically.
Of course.
I feel better. I'm less tired during the day. My cognitive capabilities, I can see that they're recharged.
Of course.
So it's interesting to see that fundamental principles that we were taught, and that we're stalwart supporters of those. Is you need to eat 3 times a day. You need to eat meat. Have balance. Well, actually, don't eat meat for 10 days and see how you're going to feel. See how your skin is going to be. See how how you're going to sleep, as I said. So, but I'm saying this to get to a point on applied knowledge that you were speaking about, which is leading us to what you're studying right now. Which is, I'd like to get a bit of that. But I mean, you can take whichever angle. But
but I like how you raise that question, because I'm a student of life, right? Let's put it this way. I'm a student of life. I love knowledge. I love understanding. I love the hard, complex questions. I love going beyond reasonable boundaries. And then sometimes there's a heavy price to pay, because when you do that, you have to accept that your very efforts will not be understood. And the moment you let go of the need of being validated, you
let go of the need of being validated.
Absolutely.
Sorry for repeating that, but that's so important. So powerful.
The moment you feel you no longer feel the need to have people clapping at the milestones that you've crossed, then you can go as far as you want, right? Because behind knowledge seeking, there's truth and self-seeking. It's self-cultivating to go beyond conventional knowledge.
Beyond knowledge seeking, there's truth and self-seeking.
Yes, exactly.
To go beyond traditional knowledge.
Yes.
Powerful.
Because here's the thing: it's not about being a knowledgeable person. It's about, it makes you more humble. The further you go, and the more humble you become.
Yeah.
So that in itself, that in itself is worth the shot, because if you really want to go that far in understanding, You first have to accept your own limitations.
Yeah.
That's the starting block. You have to be comfortable with saying to yourself, I don't know, and I'm okay. Because then whatever you find is just, okay, more knowledge, but it's not to boast your ego. It's not about boasting your ego. It's really about broadening your horizons and sharing. It's okay, knowledge seeking is a work, it's a labor of love. Because you know that when you share with your fellow human being your new level of doubts and questions, and when you crush the conventional assumptions, you're doing it because you are in an awakening, you're going through an awakening process, and that's what you're trying to share. But of course, like I said, there's a very heavy price to pay. Just remember, what was his name in Greek mythology? What was his name? The one who stole the gods from the one who stole the fire from the gods and then brought it to Prometheus.
Prometheus, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, he had to pay the sacrificial price for it. And that's what happens in any society when you cross the boundaries of knowledge. Because there's authorized knowledge, and then there's forbidden knowledge, right? So the moment you delve into that and you start questioning why is it forbidden, is because the knowledge base defines the power structure.
Yeah.
If I know what you know, I no longer need you to guide me through that knowledge acquisition. So whoever is in authority will make sure that I don't let other people know that it is possible to know without their agency. If you remember the story, Fahrenheit 451, I think it was Ray Bradbury, a famous novel of the 1950s.
Yeah.
You had these characters in the story, the firemen, right? So they were not firemen like firemen. They were firemen because they were called anytime they would find books, and they would set the books on fire. So they were called firemen. So they had their fire trucks, they had everything. But they were called the firemen, and their job was to burn piles and piles and piles of books. And that's in the 1940s, or I think he wrote the book in the 1940s, 1950s. So the only way that society can be comfortable with you crossing the boundaries of conventional knowledge is when you claim to be a fool, and they label you as a fool, and you cool with it. The moment you put yourself in those shoes, sorry, I just lost it. I'm effed up. Don't mind me. But let me tell you, yada, yada, yada. And then people are like, oh yeah, but he's just a fool.
Yeah.
See? So, yeah.
You're not restricted and limited by
Yes,
conventional knowledge.
Yeah. So I'm a happy fool.
Which is a very interesting
Yeah,
way of
seeking
saying
knowledge.
that you're different.
Yeah, I'll go to my grave laughing. Right?
Yeah.
I'll go to my grave laughing.
Yeah.
Because I'll be down there saying, now, see, I live my life fully. F-O-O-L-L-Y and F-U-L-L-Y.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah.
Right? All stuck up in anyway, sorry. Yeah.
Tell me, what do you, I know you're still studying, you're a student of life, as you said.
Yes, sir.
And you said to me that you will be defending a PhD soon.
Yeah, soon, yeah. It took me 5 years. I'm working on African unity.
Right.
See, I still believe in that idea. It's a 500-year-old idea. Well, it wasn't defined as African unity then, but I'm working on it. And my doctoral work is about optimizing the integration process and governance processes in Africa through the lens of engineering. How to define, how to conceive public policies the way an engineer would think of problem solving, and then doing it on a global scale as a way to optimize the integration of Africa. So I see Africa, let's put it this way, and that's why it took me 5 years. I finished it 3 years ago, but then I had a serious, I would call it a confrontation with my thesis supervisor. So I literally had to switch and move on to another one who was more comfortable. with my crossing boundaries and whatnot. Here's my work. I think of Africa as a global brain. Speaking of governance model, Africa would be a big brain. And in the same fashion, it's a frame of mind that is called biomimicry. So we're replicating biological processes, namely how the brain processes information and how this information, the interaction of the brain with the environment, and how the information from the environment is fed back to the brain, and how the brain therefore refine its processing of information, right? And how do we apply that to governance models? And I try to therefore explain that the way we run our countries are old school, and that now with technology, innovative approaches, policy designs, and all, it is possible to do better.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I'm trying to that's the construct I'm trying to defend.
It's going to be really interesting to read your thesis, if we can do so, as we have some examples. So I'm going to take the example of Benin, as I mentioned Benin, but I think it's very interesting to look at how it's been possible in a very systemic
It's systemic,
manner to do in 8 years what most people, maybe because of their limited knowledge, maybe because of their limited view of the world, maybe because the majority of people have only lived in Benin, and I'm not saying for sure, I'm saying maybe, couldn't actually fancy. But a real Beninese came and said, I'm going to show you.
Yeah, absolutely.
To think that some things that maybe some of the people who are listening to us don't know, that it takes now 15 minutes from walking down from the staircase of the plane, taking a bus, going through the police customs, picking up your luggage and going through the customs, getting out. It takes now, in an airport where it used to take 2 hours to do that, it takes now 15 minutes on average.
So the process has been streamlined.
Absolutely streamlined.
I hear
So
you.
they've used knowledge, they've used data to understand
where the bottlenecks are, how to
problem
remove them.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
And that's efficiency.
That's it.
And if you take the way they've built motorways, the way they've rebuilt the main cities, the way they're building government buildings, the way they're building parks and museums, it's all go through systemic thinking. This is how I would call it. Because you see that it's really structured. It's not done haphazardly.
That's it. I totally agree.
And that is a good example for me, building on what you're doing, of how we could apply knowledge and systemic processes to excellence in Africa and to better governance.
Yes, sir. I mean, the interesting bit is that, like I said, it comes from a very specific framework that is called biomimicry. We're mimicking biological systems.
Yeah.
So life in terms of systems, ecosystems, human systems, life is about the interconnectedness of the different parts, all interacting with one another. So when that is in contrast with analytical thinking. Systemic thinking is definitely different than analytical thinking.
Yeah.
Analytical thinking is modern era thinking, so 1700s, 1800s, industrial era, the 1800s, 1900s as well. It's about taking things apart, selecting one part, and then going deep within that one part, and then solving the issue for that one part, right? So if you're sick and then you have a heart problem, you go see a cardiologist, and then he will say, okay, he will diagnose your heart and he will try to determine whether the ailment is located in the heart. So he will give you some medication related to him being a heart specialist, a cardiologist. But the issue may not be heart related, but the symptoms are your heart basically reflects those symptoms, but the issue might not be your heart, it might be somewhere else. So systemic understanding, which is reflective of biological systems, the one field where you see it applied in the optimal way is in engineering. Because an engineer, by definition, is a systems thinker.
Yeah.
He has to think in systems. And then you have electrical engineers, you have chemical engineers, you have industrial engineers, but you have systems engineers.
Yeah.
And what I like about that, I'm not an engineer by trade, but I'm very much, I have two brothers that are engineers and all, but I'm very much interested in engineering because think of it this way. In French, you would say un ingénieur,
Yeah.
right? But in English, you would say an engineer, but engineer is also a verb. You have to engineer a solution. So it's a way of thinking of problems and challenges in order to solve them.
Yeah.
So I think that, especially now with the tools that we have, most of the issues that we have, governance issues, issues of world hunger, power outages, all these issues that we have, they're not political issues. It's not about what party runs the country, who speaks the loudest, so who are you most familiar with. It's not about that. It's about applied mathematics to solving structural problems and functional problems. And when you think that way, it transcends any dichotomy, any of these. It challenges the conventional ways.
Yeah.
Because we're used to thinking that we need one leader who thinks for us. That leader runs this party that thinks better than the other party and this and that. That's old school history. Now what we need to do is we need to honor life. Right?
Yeah.
And biological systems replicated as engineering. Yeah, and engineer solutions to community problems on a global scale.
Speaking of life, there are a few civilization people who have been deprived of their essence, one of which is the African civilization. When I take this as a Pan-Africanist, you'll understand what I mean, but I'm not talking about the American way, Africa, no.
Yes.
I'm talking about the fact that we have common and different traits in this vast continent of Africa. And as a matter of fact, we have these books here.
Beautiful.
On general, for those who don't know, there is a general history of Africa made of 12 books that was built and put together by UNESCO back in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And it's a wealth of knowledge of what really African history is. Compared to what we know of it today.
Yes.
And when you're uprooted, I guess that's a word, from who you are, you always have this kind of dissonance
Absolutely.
between the vibrations that are essential vibrations of your being and who you have been taught to be.
Yes, sir.
And that explains something that really has shocked me coming here is the number of problems of depigmentation, I think it is, that we see here, men and women.
Even in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Did you know that? Big time.
Yeah. Even
they call
in the
it cake soap.
Yeah. They call it cake soap.
They call it cake soap. In Trinidad, and they call it cake soap.
And they sometimes use. I've come to realize they sometimes use soap, actual soap, to get.
And they bleach their skins, and
But what are your thoughts about and what is let me tell you the story. We were in Egypt. We lived in Egypt, and I remember speaking with Americans, not speaking, but actually arguing
African
with
Americans.
No, white Americans.
Okay.
Historians coming from so-called historians coming from. Okay, I have to respect them. Historians coming from American universities and being, very adamant of the fact that civilization didn't start in Africa, that Egypt had nothing to do with it. And by the way, it was not a black civilization initially, until we found,
I hear you.
the skulls of Mary, I think it is, that actually showed differently. But what are your thoughts about these points?
Oh man, that's a good one. But how does one define being African, right? Because Africa, first off, is a functional myth.
Yes,
It's important to understand that.
a functional myth.
It's a functional myth. It's a necessary myth that we need to, in order to, the word Africa is in itself a beautiful and a sad story. And it's a never-ending story. So number one is, when you hear the word Africa, what story do you hear? And what part of that story are you involved with?
Yeah.
I'm saying this, I'm putting it this way because my understanding of Africa has changed ever since I came back. I went from Africa being an ideological construct to a spiritual inner reality. So to me, being African nowadays is definitely different than what I meant a decade or 2 decades ago. And when I hear people defending Africa with ideological wording and ideological verbiage, I'm saying, this is great, we need soldiers, we need that. But if you want to be an officer, you need to go deeper. You need to be able to relate to who we were and who we have always been. You need to understand that there's such a thing as a soul. If you're thinking as an African, there's such a thing as a soul. That your soul is related to other souls who've been there lifetimes after lifetimes. And they're still there, out there, awaiting your calling. And as long as you don't connect with these souls who are there in your bloodline, waiting for their descendant to just say, hey, you know what, I'm sorry, I forgot you guys, but you guys are welcome in my life. As long as you don't connect with the deeper philosophical and living reality of being an African. You can talk a good game. I was like that, and we need that, but that's just an introductory step. It's not the end.
Yeah.
So I became an African when I was a teenager in Montreal, spending time with people of Caribbean descent, you know, Rasta people mostly, right? Because then I didn't speak a word of Wolof, nor Peul or Fulani, and I was in that identity quest, and I was a staunch Pan-Africanist, and they were the ones who made me feel comfortable claiming that I was an African, just like them. That's what matters. So there was a Pan-Africanism of my father. He was a Pan-Africanist, but he was from a different stream of Pan-Africanism, right? And he did his part. But me growing up and spending time with you know, people from the Caribbean, I felt more comfortable. There was more space for me to define what being African was. And therefore, in the Caribbean, what do you find there that is still very much alive here? It's belief in African spirits and culture. It's still very much present.
Yeah.
And not only the Caribbean, in Latin America.
In Brazil.
In Brazil, they call it candomblé. In Haiti, they have voodoo. In Haiti, they call it santeria. In Latin America, they still speak some bastardized version of Yoruba. In Cuba, they still, I don't like the word worship, because it's not about worshiping. They still honor what the English language would label as deities, right? So my identity quest went from Pan-Africanism, you know, as a leftist, you know, learning about African Marxism and ideologies, to awakening those spirits dormant within my temple. And now, you know, if you really want to stand for Africa, yes, you have to do your homework and defend our interests, economic interests, cultural interests, But then at some point, you have to go back to the actual roots of being African. And then you will understand how people like Toussaint Louverture were able to wage wars against the armies of Napoleon and win. It started with a voodoo ceremony called Bois Caïman, right? They started with the voodoo ceremony in Bois Caïman, and this is where the Haitian Revolution started, 1791, right? You can understand who the Maroons were, or Nègre Marron. In Jamaica, you have Kojo. Kojo is a typical African name. That's a West African name, Kojo. You know,
and chef is named Kojo.
Okay, there you go, right? So you understand who Zumbi was in nowadays Brazil. Actually, the word zombie was his name that the Portuguese slave owners used to scare people away, because they used to say that this Nègre Marron named Zumbi would eat people alive. So if you want to understand what being African is, you have to understand first that the spirit of resistance came from culture. And what part of culture? Not the folkloric aspect of our culture, but reconnecting with those living souls that have been here with us for thousands and thousands of years and are waiting for us to honor them so that they can be present and they can inspire us. So that when you're going through challenges in life, they've been there. They're called ancestors. There's a reason why they're called ancestors. Not anybody becomes an ancestor once you transition. You have to earn the right to become an ancestor, because even in that other realm, your journey is still taking place. You're still learning. You're still going through life, just under a different form. So the hereafter, for us as Africans, doesn't mean a different life. It means it's the same life, but just in a different form. So who we once were, we're still here, right? So when you go through the life challenges, your forefathers and foreparents went through these challenges as well. So why don't you ask them for their advice? Because now they're out of that realm, so they have all the experience and they know what it is because they've checked out. So they're on the other side of the curtain and they know exactly what you're going through because they were once living amongst the living.
Yeah.
Why don't you ask them to guide you through? Why don't you call on their experience so that they can come and whisper in your ears? They can come and whisper in your intuition, in your dreams, and show you signs. Why don't you do that? So as long as you don't open up to them telling you, I've been through this hurdle, I've been through this struggle, here's how I overcame that hurdle. Until you're able to do that, man, you still got a long way home. So
it is Bob Marley who used to say that wherever you come from, if you're a black man, meaning black man or woman,
yes,
you're an
Peter
African.
Tosh, Peter Tosh.
It's Peter Tosh.
No matter where you come from, as long
right.
as you're a black man, you're an African. That's right.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yes, it is.
Good.
And so this point related to a common thread which we find in America, which we find in Haiti, particularly, which we find in Brazil, is now being reclaimed by Benin. To say the Western world has polluted our minds through history books, speaking about witchcraft.
Yes.
Well, there's witchcraft in France, the Druids, etc. There is witchcraft in different European countries, but they just hide it. And so they considered our religions, and particularly the voodoo religion, as inferior to the other religions, so the revealed religions. But effectively, when you start studying, and I don't claim to be an expert, but when you start studying them, you see that there's a lot of similarities actually. And if we reclaim this, like Benin is doing, it becomes interesting to the whole world.
Absolutely.
So there's the Voodoo Days now, ladies and gentlemen. Go to Voodoo Days in Benin. I think it's 9th, 10th, and 11th of January every year. This past year, there's 435,000 people who went.
Right.
And they just enjoyed it because they are learning. And this is for Africans and non-Africans, a way of learning fundamental sources of humanity.
Yes, sir.
And the culture and the spiritual culture of our ancestors.
Yes.
And being able to talk to ancestors is actually being able to live.
Yes, sir.
Because life never stops.
That's
never
it.
ends.
No.
It's just we go into a different form.
Absolutely. And besides, it certainly doesn't mean that if you are Christian, an African and Christian, that you have to reject Christianity. Christianity asks you to reject your being African. But claiming your African roots doesn't imply that you have to reject Christianity or that you have to reject Islam or Judaism,
Yeah.
right? It means that we are culturally mixed people. I don't like the word hybridization process, but we're culturally mixed, and we have to have enough wisdom to find a balance and find a strength in all of the different spiritual expressions.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we study Greek and Roman mythology, but when it comes to African mythology, we call it witchcraft and religions. When in fact, these
Because
are
we learned
mythologies.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But these are mythologies and riddles, and there are teachings behind these mythologies. But then as you embody and you bring these mythologies to life, then your life changes, because these are philosophical riddles that are supposed to trigger a different understanding of yourself and therefore different behavior in your life. When you see someone dancing or someone in a trance state, if you asked what's happening, they would say, oh, he's possessed by the gods or the goddesses. He's honored by the gods and the goddesses. But what's happening is on a psychic level, there's his own unconscious that is coming to the fore. The archetypal structure of his unconscious is manifesting through that dance or through that whatever manifestation you're seeing. Yeah. There's nothing to do with witchcraft.
No.
It has to do with expressing what you have in the inner corners of your unconscious is coming out. So that's a healing process that's happening, especially during the slave trade. Imagine being a slave during the day and being vessel for the gods at night. So you living your darkest times during the day because you're in the cotton fields, and you become an enlightened being by night.
Yeah. And actually, it's a manifestation of an enhanced being.
Absolutely.
Through this unconscious process.
Absolutely.
They're going through.
Yes. So you. Oh man, this is how we lost the knowledge of ourselves, right? And we should not reject whatever we learn from the Western world. We have to learn, and we have to be able to maneuver their knowledge as well. We have to make it our own knowledge. But we have to make sure that we do not trade the knowledge of ourselves with whatever story they told us about who we were.
Yeah.
Because we have to be able to operate our archetypal realities that come from the ancestors do live in your unconscious, in your psyche. This is where they live, in your psyche.
Yeah.
So it's not about some magical force that comes from the universe. What universe are we talking about? What gods and goddesses are we talking about? We're talking about the human psyche unfolding. This is how you heal, because whatever you have within comes without. So we have to be able to maneuver these different languages. We have to be able to understand that when, in Western medical terms, someone would suffer from a psychotic episode, in Africa would say, this is that spirit that is manifesting through him. These are just languages, right? These are just jargons. So we have to be able, I'm sorry, that's the point I'm trying to make. We have to be able to switch codes between ancestral language and AI, which is another form of witchcraft.
It is.
Artificial intelligence is another form of witchcraft.
It's magic.
Right? I could label it as witchcraft just as much as our applied knowledge through traditional vessels is what they call witchcraft.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I think we live in a day and age where everything is coming to full disclosure. And so it's not about going back to, we were once the pharaohs of Egypt, and therefore we have to go back to who we were. It's not about that. We never lost who we were. We just forgot how to reach out. Yeah. Right? So it's about now feeling comfortable in the 21st century with saying that our journey started thousands of years ago, and we're still here, and we're going on for the next thousands and thousands of years. And fool me once, shame on you. But there's not going to be any second fooling.
Indeed. So I look at it in this way: we are one. At the beginning, it is one, and we go back to one. And so we talked about a lot of different things. Knowledge is one of them, and getting to know the spiritual writings of Asian societies.
Yes.
Getting to know the spiritual writings of Middle Eastern societies.
Yes.
Getting to know the spiritual
Cuneiforms
of Western societies,
Yes.
of African societies. You get back in touch with that oneness of humanity.
Absolutely.
And when you find out that there's a oneness in humanity, you just appreciate the differences.
Yeah.
You don't, you get rid of the fears, you appreciate and you embrace it. And the more you embrace it, the more you enhance who you are. Whether it's through books, whether it's through audiobooks nowadays, whether it's through these kind of conversations
Absolutely,
where I'm learning a
absolutely.
lot from you.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning a lot from you, from your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
But one thing that it leads me to think about and to question you is, what's the place that, I like yoga, and I've practiced yoga, different types of yoga in my life. I was fortunate to be with Maître Khan, who's he
Really has that
well-known
Egyptian flavor
exactly
to yoga,
to
Babakar Khan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he's well over 80. He's actually getting to his 90s, I think, at the moment. But he's still just an amazing.
Bless him,
It's been a few years since I've been in touch with him. But whether it's yoga, I've been recently looking at Tai Chi, and it's really interesting in terms of the breathing, particularly that it brings to you, or different types of martial arts. What is martial arts to you?
Oh man, I'll tell you, that's a big part of my life. Martial arts. I'll tell you my story with martial arts.
Sure.
Actually, I started practicing martial arts not so long ago, 12 years ago. But the idea of getting into martial arts was before. Like, I was in Montreal. I was this, as I said, this activist, right? And at the time, we used to talk of outer globalization. We want a different world. Hence my traveling across the world to learn so that I can be a more incisive outer globalization activist. I would give speeches here and there. And then I had a friend who said to me after, I don't remember what it was a lecture or something like that, and then came to me afterwards and said, you talk about changing the world and fighting the system, but are you a fighter? Are you a warrior? You talk like a warrior, but are you a warrior? And then he basically emphasized on the training as a warrior aspect, rather than just sounding like a warrior. And boom, this is how the whole story started. Because the idea lingered for years. And then when I moved back in 2012, 2012, 2011, 2012, 2013, I was a decent runner, right? But I wasn't into any form of discipline. I was just running because I was like, yeah, okay, why not? Let's do something. And then growing up in Abidjan when I was younger, Taekwondo was very popular. So I kept that in mind, and I said, you know what, let me try that thing that I heard so much about when I was a kid. But it wasn't even about trying, it was about, okay, if I start this, I'm going all the way to my black belt, because you have to have a goal. And I was like, I'm starting this, I'm going all the way to my black belt. I'm not gonna just try, I'm gonna do it seriously. And then I started, and it was funny because being a white belt and you are 30 something, you see all these kids and youngsters and especially Taekwondo, high flying kicks and all, and I was impressed, I was intimidated, I was angry, I was like, what am I doing here? What is this? But I'd already told the instructor that I would go all the way to black belt. So day one, I was like, man, what did I get myself into? And then I remember chilling with my friends and then be like, I didn't want to tell them that I'd started Taekwondo, so I would tell them, yeah, I have this thing that I got to do, I'll reach you guys later. But then they would ask me, where are you going? I wouldn't tell them I'm going to train in Taekwondo, right? So first when I started, the first couple of years, the first 2-3 years, I wouldn't say I didn't like it. I just didn't give up because I gave my word that I would go to black belt. So I would just almost like mechanically just go. And then I was like, yeah, what is this that I'm doing? You're learning about, movements and names. And to me, I couldn't see the bigger picture. And then little by little, I realized that, let's say kicks, for instance, like one kick in Taekwondo, you could, in one training session, you can repeat the same kicks, left, right, the same kicks hundreds of times. So you get to a point where it's physical, and then it's mental, and then you realize that your mind it's your mind telling your body, oh, come on, you cannot do as many, you gotta stop. What is this? And then you realize that you have to start fighting your own mind because your own mind is telling you to stop. So now when you're doing more and more kicks, you feel like stopping, and then you realize that your mind is trying to get you to stop. But you're stronger than your own mind, so you have to conquer your mind and do more. So then I started engaging in that inner conversation through Taekwondo, through martial arts, I should say through martial arts. And the more I would do it, and the more it became an inner conversation. It was no longer about black belt or whatever belt, it was about anytime I go on the mat, I engage in challenging myself and having my own mind telling me, no, you can't do it, okay, I give up, you win. So it was about winning each time. And then I realized that this thing goes deeper because Taekwondo is really kicks, but then each martial art has its own twist. So Taekwondo is 90% kicks and 10% hands and fists. Then I started understanding little by little that it goes beyond just the mind. Now it becomes me and moving my body and mind through space and maneuvering the laws of physics. Because how do you think people spin all those kicks and then fly and do all that? It's because then you have to have a certain awareness of how your body moves through space. And you have to compensate. If you want to throw a kick, then you have to spring towards whomever you want to kick. Therefore, if you want to do this, therefore you have to know your body weight. You have to know how your body moves. You have to balance your body, and then you have to see your body with axes. You move like this, you move like this, you lift your hand, your feet, your knees like this. So having that awareness of how my body moves, that was a different level of understanding, right? And then I got into the fights. Man, I kicked butts and I got my butt kicked, like seriously. That really humbles your ego. It really humbles your ego because then a Taekwondo, a fight in Taekwondo, in martial arts, or even when you fight, you're not actually, it's like a chess game. It's not about the fighting. That's not what this is about. The fighting is the circumstance, but you're not there to fight. You're there to strategize.
Yeah.
So how do you improve on your strategical reading of your opponent? Within a split second, you have to be able to read the body and preemptively either position yourself or attack. Or you have to get the opponent to attack so that you have enough space and leverage so that you can kick back. So the more you train in fighting, the more you see how someone's way of moving the body can tell you whether he's well-trained, whether you're well-trained, whether he's sadistic or compassionate. You can see all that within a split second because when the time comes to fight, you don't have time to think. You've trained your body so well that the level of training just shows in how you fight because the body just moves. Actually, my nephews, my kid, my friends, they make fun of me a lot because when I'm scared, like my body's ready to kick without me thinking. And I'm like, okay, sorry, I just don't think. The moment I hear something that is like threatening, my body's ready to fight, and then I'm just like, what's happening, right? So martial art became a way for me to discipline myself, a way for me to deal with pain as a teacher, endurance as a teacher. When you get to your black belt, you realize that what is black about a black belt? It's all your fears, all your doubts, all your everything that is dark about you. You do not negate that. You don't reject it to the side. You cope with it in a savvy, workable fashion. You're still a learner, but you carry your dark side with you. So that's what makes you a peaceful person. It's because you know that you have a dark side. So you don't have a real martial artist doesn't get involved into a fight, except if it's to protect your life or someone else's life, right? But you don't have an opponent in front of you. You have a mirror. Why do you think we greet respectfully before a fight, after a fight? Even if that guy really messed you up, you got your nose all cracked up, bloody and everything. That guy is your best teacher because he showed you how serious you are in your commitment to train yourself and becoming a better person. So he showed you your weak spots. So he taught you how to get better.
In some ways, it's feedback.
Absolutely.
Immediate.
And that's the feedback of the worst kind because you're bleeding and you're like, oh man, see, broken rib, but that's life right there in front of you. Because once you're okay with taking blows and taking kicks to your head, then you can go through life taking kicks. Mm-hmm. Because that's what, now you're a martial artist now.
That's a very good way.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be that extensive, but yeah.
It's a very, very good way of describing a lot of the things that we've talked about, actually.
I mean, now I got to a point where I'm no longer interested in fighting. Although I still train. There's another level now, thanks to martial art, that warrior culture, that warrior spirit is in me. Mm. But now I'm interested in healing. And I realized that whole journey was my healing journey.
Yeah.
Even your body, how do you heal? Your immune system fights the foreign body. Learn from the DNA of the virus or whatever bacteria that got into your body. Learns from that, and then gets the feedback from fighting that foreign toxic body in your body, and your body becomes better at defending itself. That's when the healing takes place. Yeah. So I call martial art my healing, my therapy. So now I started doing it in prisons now.
Training people?
Yes, youngsters, right? Juvenile detention, we would call it in the States. Started doing that 4 years ago. I do it less now because I don't have as much time. But why do I do that? It's because these young folks in prisons are there because they had a fight. They have a fight that they were never trained for. Mm. So they took out their anger, their aggression, their missing their parents or having absentee father or someone, whatever fights they had in life, they never learned how to channel that energy into healing them and being at ease and peaceful with that. So, yeah.
Gaynde,
yes,
this has been a very, very rich, wealthy, full of wealth, full of wisdom discussion and podcast, and I'm very, very grateful to you for taking the time to come all the way to Gorée. You have to go past the ocean. And come here.
We call it Mami Wata, right?
Exactly.
I threw a coin
and come here and discuss with me. I've been enriched by our conversation.
Likewise, thank you so much.
And for those of you listening to us, pour ceux qui parlent français simplement, tout est sous-titré et donc vous aurez la possibilité de bien le comprendre. Merci de votre présence et écrivez dans les commentaires ce que vous pensez de notre conversation et comment est-ce que vous voudriez qu'on vous adresse régulièrement pour avoir plus d'informations, plus de podcasts de ce genre que nous ferons de temps en temps. Nous avons prévu d'en faire à peu près 4 cette année. Ceci est le 2e et on vous attend sur les prochains.
And I want to thank the divine mystery. I want to thank our ancestors, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to share the light of knowledge.
Thank you so much for sharing that gratitude.
Yes, sir.
And I join you in thanking divine ancestors. Blessings.
Bless you. Yes,
thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Till next time, thank you very much.